The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Every lawn perfectly trimmed, every mailbox painted the same dull beige. But behind one house stood something the HOA hated more than anything, a wooden shed. And it belonged to David. David had built the shed years ago with his late father. To him, it wasn't just storage, it was sacred. But the HOA board, led by President Marjorie, called it an eyesore. And they were determined to make it disappear. The first letter came on a Monday. Violation notice, unauthorized structure. David crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. But Marjorie wasn't going to stop with a letter. By Friday, David woke to the roar of engines. Construction trucks lined the street. A bulldozer sat at the curb, its headlights glaring like hungry eyes. Marjorie stood there in her blazer, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a general. The neighbors gathered, whispering. David's heart pounded. Were they really here to destroy his father's shed? Stop! David shouted, running barefoot across the lawn. His voice cracked the morning air. The bulldozer paused, but Marjorie smirked. You had your chance to comply, David. David pleaded, this shed, it's all I have left of my dad. For a moment, silence. Then Marjorie snapped her fingers. The bulldozer roared back to life. Neighbors gasped as the bulldozer rolled forward. David's fists clenched. He knew the HOA wouldn't stop, not unless he stopped them first. He stepped directly in front of the shed, arms outstretched. If you want it gone, you'll have to go through me. Marjorie's smirk twisted into rage. The construction crew hesitated. One worker muttered, "Lady, this doesn't feel right." But Marjorie snapped, "Do it, or you'll never work in this town again." David locked eyes with the bulldozer driver. "Don't do this." The driver froze, sweat glistening. For a moment, it looked like compassion might win. But then Marjorie pulled out her phone. "One call, and your job's gone." The driver swallowed hard. The machine's gears groaned back into motion. The shed trembled as the bulldozer rolled closer. Boards creaked, dust fell, neighbors held their breath. David whispered to himself, "Not today." In one swift move, David climbed onto the bulldozer's front. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Shut it down," he screamed. The driver slammed the brakes, metal screeching. Dust exploded into the air. Marjorie's face twisted in fury. This battle was just beginning. Neighbors rushed forward, shouting, "He's going to get himself killed." But David clung tighter to the bulldozer, his knuckles white with fury. Marjorie snapped, "Remove him. Now." But none of the workers dared touch David. They knew this wasn't about a shed anymore, it was about respect. David looked out at the neighbors. "Are you really going to let them bulldoze memories? My father built this with me." His voice shook the silence. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some nodded, some looked away. Marjorie's jaw tightened, she could feel her grip slipping. Finally, one elderly neighbor stepped forward. "Leave the man's shed alone. It's not hurting anyone." The crowd murmured in agreement. Marjorie's face went pale. She turned to the bulldozer driver, "Do it anyway." But this time, the driver shook his head. The crowd erupted in cheers. David climbed down, chest heaving. For the first time, it felt like he wasn't standing alone. But Marjorie wasn't finished. Her smile returned, thin and venomous. "You think this is over, David? The board always wins." She marched away, heels clicking like gunshots. The neighbors dispersed, but the unease lingered. David knew this was only round one. That night, David couldn't sleep. He sat in the shed, running his hand across the wooden walls his father once built. Memories whispered in the silence. He remembered his father's words, "Son, some things you build with your hands, but you guard with your heart." David clenched his fists. He wouldn't surrender. Outside, headlights flashed. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of his house. Marjorie had returned, with reinforcements. 2 board members stepped out, suits crisp, faces stern. They carried folders, legal threats, fines, eviction warnings. David stepped outside, jaw set. "You're not scaring me with paper." But deep down, he knew, this fight was about to escalate. Marjorie leaned against the SUV, smiling in the shadows. "By dawn, your shed will be gone." Her words cut like a blade through the night. David's heart hammered. He turned to face Marjorie. "You'll have to drag me out of here." His voice echoed across the dark street. Marjorie signaled to the board members. They stepped forward, waving the legal notices like weapons. But David didn't flinch. From the shadows, a voice called out, "Enough." It was the elderly neighbor again, cane in hand, standing tall like a soldier. More neighbors emerged from their homes, porch lights flicking on one by one. The street filled with quiet rebellion. Marjorie's smirk faded. "Go back inside. This doesn't concern you." But the neighbors stood their ground, shoulder to shoulder. David stepped into the crowd. For the first time, he felt a surge of power, an army of voices against one tyrant. Marjorie hissed, "You'll regret this." She snapped her fingers, and the board members retreated into the SUV. Its engine roared to life. The SUV tore away, tires screeching. But everyone knew this wasn't the end. The HOA president always had another play. David turned to the neighbors. "They'll be back by morning." "But we're not moving." Heads nodded. The rebellion had begun. They formed a circle around the shed, dragging out chairs, lanterns, even coolers. If Marjorie came back, she'd find a wall of people waiting. David sat in the center, the shed behind him. He whispered, "Dad, I hope you're watching." Above, the stars shimmered in silence. Midnight passed. Some neighbors dozed in chairs, others whispered quietly. But everyone knew dawn would bring a storm. At 3 a.m., headlights pierced the street again. A convoy of vehicles rolled in, bigger, louder, and angrier. Marjorie stepped out first, flanked by more board members and hired security. This time, she wasn't asking, she was taking. The neighbors stood, lanterns raised. David rose slowly, eyes locked on Marjorie. The night had been tense, but dawn would decide everything. The hired security stepped forward, tall and broad, their black uniforms glowing under the SUV lights. One cracked his knuckles. The neighbors stiffened. Marjorie's voice sliced the air. "Move aside, or we'll move you." She pointed at the shed like it was an enemy bunker. David stepped forward, lantern light flickering on his face. "This isn't just a shed, it's history. And you're not erasing it tonight." The security guards pushed closer, but suddenly the elderly neighbor slammed his cane on the pavement. "Over my dead body." The crowd roared in agreement. Mothers, fathers, teenagers, all stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the shed like a human wall. Marjorie's smile cracked. For the first time, she looked nervous. But she quickly masked it with a sneer. "You can't fight the law." David shot back, "Then call the police. Let them see what you're doing." The crowd murmured in agreement. Marjorie froze. Police attention was the last thing she wanted. Her power thrived in silence, in fear. But tonight, she had neither. The guards looked at each other, uncertain. One muttered, "Ma'am, this doesn't feel right." Even paid muscle had limits. Suddenly, a neighbor pulled out his phone and started recording. Then another. Dozens of screens lit the night. Marjorie's eyes widened. The internet was the one courtroom she couldn't control. Her fury cracked into desperation. David raised his voice. "This shed isn't just wood and nails, it's family. And tonight, this whole street became my family too." Cheers erupted, echoing through the night. The security guards backed away. Marjorie's grip on power was crumbling before her eyes. But Marjorie whispered to herself, if I can't destroy his shed tonight, I'll do it at dawn. Her eyes glinted with cold resolve. As the neighbors settled back into their vigil, David looked east. The horizon was starting to glow faintly. Dawn, and the final battle, was coming. Tom didn't even flinch when Martin shouted across the yard. He simply pointed to the spot where Martin's car usually sat, now empty. Funny how things disappear, huh? Tom said coldly. Martin's face drained of color. His prized luxury sedan was gone. The same way his HOA crew had dragged away Tom's shed, now his car had vanished into the night. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering. Some smirked, others gasped. For once, the entire community wasn't against Tom. Martin lunged toward Tom, accusing him of theft. But Tom only raised his hands. Careful, Martin, accusations like that need proof. The sheriff arrived moments later, sirens slicing through the silence. Martin rushed forward, demanding Tom's arrest. But the sheriff didn't cuff Tom. Instead, he walked over to Martin and asked the question that froze the president cold, where were you when the shed was bulldozed? Martin stammered, I was, supervising. The sheriff nodded slowly. So you admit it? Tom smirked again. See, Sheriff. They destroyed my property first. Seems like karma works quick in this neighborhood. The sheriff warned both men to stay calm. But everyone could see it, Martin was unraveling. His authority was slipping through his fingers. The neighbors began murmuring louder now. They bulldozed his shed, maybe this is payback. Serves Martin right. The tide was turning. For the first time, Martin realized, he wasn't untouchable. And Tom knew it. The sheriff told Martin his car would be reported stolen. But Tom? He was free to go. Tom walked back into his dark house, shutting the door with a slow creak. Outside, Martin's empire of control began to crumble. For the first time, the neighbors didn't fear the HOA. They feared what Tom might do next. And from that night on, the shed was gone, but so was Martin's car, and with it, his power over the neighborhood. The next morning, the neighborhood gathered, whispering about the events of last night. The shed was gone, but so was the HOA president's car. People avoided eye contact, afraid to ask questions out loud. The man stepped onto his porch, sipping his coffee, calm and collected. His eyes scanned the crowd, but he said nothing, just a small, knowing smile. By noon, rumors were flying. Some claimed the car had been stolen. Others whispered the man had taken matters into his own hands. The vice president of the HOA knocked on the man's door, demanding answers. The man opened slowly, eyes cold, silence hanging heavy between them. Where's the president's car? The vice president barked. The man just shrugged, his silence louder than words. Later that day, flyers appeared around the neighborhood, car stolen, $5,000 reward. But no one came forward. At night, some swore they heard the faint sound of metal scraping, deep in the nearby woods. But no one dared investigate. The HOA's weekly meeting was chaos. Members demanded answers, shouting over each other, fear replacing authority. The vice president tried to calm them, but her voice cracked. The power the HOA once held was slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, the man fixed a new lock on his gate, humming softly, as if nothing had happened. The neighbors began shifting alliances. Some admired the man's defiance. Others feared retaliation from the HOA. The HOA vice president ordered surveillance cameras installed around the neighborhood, hoping to restore control. But that night, every single camera was mysteriously turned to face the sky. The neighborhood was unraveling. Control was gone, replaced by paranoia. And through it all, the man remained silent. A storm was coming, and everyone knew it. The neighbors watched from porches as dawn painted the sky orange. The shed stood firm, battered but still standing, while the HOA president's car sat awkwardly jammed against the oak tree. Whispers spread like wildfire. Mr. Thompson emerged from his porch, holding a steaming coffee mug, eyes locked on the chaos. His silence carried more weight than words. Everyone knew, this was bigger than just a shed. The HOA board members scrambled, trying to cover the car with tarps, but the sight was impossible to hide. Phones clicked, videos rolled, and social media lit up before breakfast. By 7 a.m., the local news van rolled in. Reporters spilled out, cameras ready, eager to capture the scandal, a shed that wouldn't break, and a president's pride crushed against a tree. The HOA president stormed out of his house, face red, tie half-tied, yelling at the cameraman to leave. His anger only fueled the spectacle. The neighbors laughed quietly behind their fences. Reporters shoved microphones forward. Is it true you ordered an illegal demolition? How do you explain the car in the tree? His sputtering only made things worse. Meanwhile, John sat calmly on his porch, sipping tea, letting the chaos unfold. He didn't have to say a word, the world was finally seeing the HOA for what it really was. The police arrived next, sirens off but lights flashing. They assessed the wreck, questioned the shaken president, and quietly wrote notes while cameras rolled. One officer shook his head and muttered, "Never seen anything like this." The microphone caught it, and the clip went viral within minutes. The HOA president's wife appeared, her voice sharp as a blade. "You've embarrassed us all, Harold," she shouted, pointing at the wrecked car. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The HOA president tried to salvage dignity, but his voice cracked. He promised a formal statement, but no one cared. The damage was already permanent. The shed stood like a symbol of defiance, its wood scarred but unbroken. To the neighborhood, it wasn't just a shed anymore, it was a monument. Children pointed at it, whispering stories. Parents smiled, shaking their heads, knowing they'd be telling this tale for years. That night, social media exploded. Memes spread, the unbreakable shed, the car tree collision, the furious president's face. A local legend was born overnight. John closed his blinds, finally at peace. He didn't win by fighting, he won by standing firm. And the whole town now knew the truth. By dawn, the shed was nothing but splinters, flattened under the weight of the bulldozer. But something else was gone too, Stanley's prized luxury car, parked right beside it. The crowd gasped. The car wasn't crushed, it had vanished. Stanley spun around, shouting, "Where's my car?" His voice cracked with fury. Whispers rippled through the street. Some said karma had taken its course. Others wondered if the owner had planned this all along. Stanley dialed 911, demanding an investigation. His hands shook as he tried to explain, "They destroyed his shed, and now my car is gone." The police arrived, lights flashing. They surveyed the rubble, the empty space where the car once sat, and Stanley's pale face. "Sir," an officer said, "are you suggesting the homeowner stole your car? After you demolished his shed?" The crowd chuckled bitterly. Stanley's face flushed red. "Yes. That man is responsible." But the homeowner wasn't there, he had vanished too. By noon, rumors spread like wildfire, the homeowner had packed up and left, taking the HOA president's car as poetic justice. The HOA board scrambled. Without Stanley's leadership, cracks began to show. Members whispered about resigning before the scandal ruined them all. Meanwhile, the demolished shed became a symbol of rebellion. Neighbors placed flowers on the rubble, like it was a grave. The homeowner's legend grew. To some, he was a hero who outsmarted tyranny. To others, a ghost who disappeared with vengeance complete. Stanley's car was never found. Some swore they saw it driving out of town before dawn, headlights slicing through the mist. Others believed the earth swallowed it, the same way the HOA's authority was crumbling before their eyes. For the first time, the HOA looked weak. And the neighbors, once silent and fearful, finally found their voice. The shed was gone. The car was gone. But what remained was louder than both, a neighborhood no longer afraid. The courtroom gasped when Alan revealed a hidden deed clause, granting him permanent rights to the land where the shed stood. Martha's smug grin vanished instantly, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Martha, did you knowingly withhold this document?" She stammered, her voice cracking. I wasn't aware of that clause." Alan's lawyer slammed another document down, emails where Martha admitted she planned to bury the shed in dust. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "This is perjury, Mrs. Martha." The HOA board members shrank in their seats, realizing their empire was crumbling. Alan's friends from the neighborhood sat proudly behind him, nodding in solidarity. The judge ruled swiftly, the HOA was guilty of harassment, fraud, and property destruction. Gasps erupted, followed by murmurs of victory from Alan's supporters. Martha tried to protest, but the bailiff's hand rested firmly on her shoulder. Alan stood tall, his shed safe, his honor restored, his enemies defeated. The courtroom applauded, rare for such proceedings, but deserved. Outside, the news cameras swarmed, microphones shoved forward, Alan hailed as a hero. He looked into the lens, and simply said, "This was never about a shed. This was about respect." The HOA president's car sat at the bottom of the lake, half submerged, its headlights glowing faintly in the murky water. The sight drew a crowd, whispers filling the night air. Sheriff's deputies arrived, their flashlights sweeping over the water. The HOA president stood by, drenched in sweat, his excuses collapsing as neighbors pointed fingers. One old neighbor shouted, "He tried to destroy John's shed. Now look what's destroyed." The crowd murmured in agreement, voices rising like a storm. The sheriff's voice cut through the noise, "Mr. Daniels, you're under arrest." The president's smug mask shattered, replaced with a look of pure terror. John stood silently, arms crossed, watching the downfall of the man who had tormented the neighborhood for years. It was justice served cold. As the sheriff's car pulled away, neighbors surrounded John. For the first time, they didn't see him as a problem, but as the man who had saved them. One neighbor whispered, "He stood up when none of us could." Another added, "We owe him more than we know." Their unity felt stronger than ever. The next morning, sunlight broke over the quiet street. John's shed still stood tall, scarred but undefeated, a symbol of defiance and dignity. Reporters swarmed the block, broadcasting the story of the HOA president's downfall. John stayed silent, his shed speaking louder than any words. The HOA dissolved within weeks, its power shattered. What remained was a neighborhood that finally breathed free of fear. John rebuilt his shed stronger than ever, not out of spite, but as a reminder, no bully could tear down what was built with heart. At the dedication, children painted their handprints across the shed's wall. A new legacy was born, one rooted in unity, not fear. John finally smiled. For years he had fought alone. Now, his neighbors stood beside him, not as enemies, but as a family. The shed became a landmark, a story whispered across town, of the man who stood tall, and the HOA that fell. As night fell again, John sat on his porch, the shed standing firm. He whispered, "Some things are worth fighting for." And for once, the night was quiet. The HOA president stumbled backward, speechless, as neighbors stared at the vacant space where his luxury car had once been. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, his obsession with control had led to his own downfall. The shed stood untouched, its wooden frame glowing under the morning sun. To many, it wasn't just a shed anymore, it was a symbol of defiance. Mark's phone buzzed with messages of support from neighbors who once stayed silent. The tide had finally turned against the HOA. At an emergency HOA meeting, the president demanded answers. But instead of compliance, he was met with folded arms and cold stares. One neighbor finally stood up, "You tried to bulldoze a man's home. And now? We're done letting you control us." Applause filled the room. The president's face turned pale. For the first time, he realized he wasn't feared anymore, he was despised. Mark remained quiet. He didn't need to gloat. The neighborhood was speaking louder than he ever could. The board voted, unanimously, to remove the HOA president from power. His reign of intimidation was finally over. Cheers erupted as the decision was announced. For the first time in years, neighbors felt free. The ex-president stormed out, muttering threats. But no one followed. His words carried no weight anymore. Later that night, Mark sat by the shed with a quiet smile. It wasn't just about wood and nails, it was about dignity. His daughter joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You stood up for us, Dad. That shed will always remind us of it." Across the neighborhood, families gathered on porches, talking freely, unafraid for the first time. The shed, once a target, now stood as the heart of the neighborhood's rebellion. A monument to standing tall. And while the HOA president's car was gone, what truly vanished was the grip of fear he once held over everyone. The HOA president's voice cracked as he faced the crowd. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered. But everyone had seen the evidence. His arrogance, his threats, and his greed, exposed under the harsh morning sun. One woman shouted, "You tried to ruin his shed, now your car's gone. That's karma." The crowd erupted, half in anger, half in laughter. The president's face flushed red. The man with the shed raised his hand, silencing the chaos. "I never wanted revenge," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I just wanted peace in my own yard." But the HOA president snarled, "You think this is over? You'll regret this." His threats rang hollow now, bouncing off the walls of his collapsing authority. Suddenly, police sirens cut through the morning air. The crowd turned as two squad cars pulled up, lights flashing red and blue. The HOA president froze. The officers stepped out, one holding a folder. "We have some questions for you, sir," the officer said, locking eyes with the HOA president. The crowd went silent. The president's hands shook. "This is harassment," he barked. But the officers didn't flinch. "Sir, we have reports of fraud and intimidation." "Step aside." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fraud. Intimidation. Neighbors whispered to each other, connecting dots they hadn't dared to consider before. The man with the shed stood still, his jaw tight. He had suspected corruption, but never imagined it would run this deep. The HOA president's voice cracked. "You can't do this to me. I run this neighborhood." But the words sounded pitiful now, stripped of power. One officer pulled out handcuffs. "You don't run anything anymore," he said. The metal clink echoed through the crowd. The crowd burst into cheers. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. The shed owner closed his eyes, breathing out relief. The HOA president, handcuffed, was led toward the squad car. His head hung low as jeers echoed around him. His empire of control crumbled in minutes. The shed stood tall, untouched by bulldozers, as if it had survived not just a night of threats, but years of tyranny. It had become a symbol of defiance. And as the police cars pulled away, the man whispered to himself, "This is my home. And no one, not even an HOA, will ever take it from me."